It was nearing midnight when the cab dropped me off in front of our house. The headlights swept across the driveway, and that's when I saw it. A sleek, gold Mercedes parked right where my car should have been. It didn't belong to anyone I knew. At first, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe Camila, my wife, had invited a friend over. It wasn't like her to do that without telling me. But tonight had been a big one for me. A deal that'd finally secure our future. Maybe she planned some surprise celebration. But something fell off. The lights in the house were mostly out, except for a faint glow from upstairs. I stood there, my breath visible in the cold, feeling the weight of the night shift. Exhaustion and the champagne I'd had earlier blurred my thoughts. I shook my head, trying to clear it. No big deal, I told myself, walking up to the house. But deep down, something was already gnawing at me. The door was unlocked. That was strange. Camila always made a big deal about locking up, even if I was out late. As I stepped inside, the house felt unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that gets under your skin. I paused, setting my briefcase down carefully. My heartbeat quickened as I listened to the stillness. It wasn't just a silence. It was the feeling of being out of place in my own home. Something was wrong that I stood there in the dimly lit entryway, staring into the darkened house. The air felt heavier than it should have. My gut twisted as I shut the door softly behind me. I'd come home 100 times to this same house, but tonight it didn't feel like mine. The gold Mercedes outside lingered in my mind. Who would Camila invite this late? I slipped off my shoes and moved quietly through the living room. The soft carpet under my feet did nothing to muffle the thudding in my chest. A glance at the kitchen told me no one was there. The sink was empty, the countertops clean. I checked the wine rack, untouched. If this was some celebration, it didn't look like one. The house was too neat, too quiet. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the faint light coming from our bedroom. My pulse quickened. For a second, I thought about turning around, stepping back out into the night, and calling her. Give her the chance to explain herself before I walked into whatever this was. But something pulled me forward. I had to know. With each step, the faint creak of the wooden stairs felt like it echoed through the house. I stopped halfway up, listening. There it was, soft breathing, almost a faint snore. The sound sent a wave of heat through me. It wasn't just Camila. There was someone else. I froze, gripping the railing. My brain scrambled for excuses. Maybe she wasn't feeling well and called a friend to stay over. Maybe it was something innocent, but I couldn't ignore the knot tightening in my stomach. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough for me to see. I leaned in, careful not to make a sound. That's when I saw them. Camila, lying tangled in the sheets, her bare skin illuminated by the faint light of her bedside lamp. Beside her, a man I didn't recognize. His arm was draped across her like it belonged there. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, the world around me stopped for a moment. I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone, my lungs heavy, like I'd forgotten how to breathe. I stared through the crack in the door, hoping, praying that my mind was playing tricks on me. But it wasn't. There she was, Camila, my wife of 17 years, naked and peaceful in the arms of a man who didn't belong in our home, let alone in our bed. The sight hit me like a freight train. My first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief. This couldn't be real. The same woman who held my hand at our wedding, who cried with me when we bought this house, who promised me forever, now lay curled against another man, snoring softly like there was nothing wrong with the world. I didn't even realize I was gripping the doorframe until my knuckles started to ache. My chest heaved as I fought the urge to burst into the room and rip him out of the bed. But then Camila stirred. Her head shifted slightly, her face turning toward the door. I ducked back into the hallway, pressing myself against the wall. My heart pounded so loud, I was sure they'd hear it. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. Every thought I had contradicted the next. Storm in there, demand answers, make them pay. No, leave, walk away. Don't give them the satisfaction of knowing they broke you. I couldn't think straight. The image of them burned into my mind, and no matter how many excuses I tried to conjure, maybe it wasn't what it looked like, maybe there was some kind of explanation. None of it held up. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling. I opened the camera, leaned back toward the door, and snapped a few photos. The flash was off, but my finger hovered over it like a warning to myself. One wrong move, one sudden sound, and I'd be face to face with the worst moment of my life. The images were crystal clear. Camila's golden hair splayed across the pillow, her peaceful expression like she didn't have a care in the world. The man's broad back, his arm thrown possessively over her, his face buried in her neck. I stared at the photos, each one a hammer pounding the nails into the coffin of our marriage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to kick the door open, flip the bed, drag that man out of my house. But I stood there, frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what I'd just uncovered. Instead, I took another step back into the shadows of the hallway, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. My foot caught the edge of the hallway rug, and I almost stumbled. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from making any noise. The pain brought me back into focus. This wasn't the time to lose control. If I confronted them now, I wouldn't stop myself. I'd do something reckless, something irreversible. I couldn't let this moment destroy me more than it already had. I turned and headed down the stairs, each step deliberate and slow, praying they wouldn't hear the creaks in the old wood. I reached the living room and sank into the couch, my head in my hands. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing. What now? What the hell do I do now? The memories started rushing in. Camila's warm smile when I kissed her goodbye that morning, the way she laughed when I told her I'd be late, but that it was worth it. I'd closed the deal of a lifetime, a 7-figure contract that would secure our future, give us the life we always talked about. And she knew. She knew what this meant for us. Was this her way of celebrating? The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the audacity to bring him here, to our bed, the place where we made promises, where we planned our future, where I thought she loved me. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind kept replaying the scene upstairs, every detail searing itself into my memory. Her soft snore, the rise and fall of her chest, the way the man's hand rested on her hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then, a thought struck me like a slap to the face. My daughters. They were asleep in their rooms, just down the hall from where their mother lay with a stranger. If they woke up, if they walked in on this. The anger finally surged, a white-hot flame burning through the numbness that had kept me paralyzed. I wanted to storm back up there, drag that man out by his throat, and make him pay for what he'd done, for what they'd done. But I stopped myself. For the first time that night, I felt clarity. As much as I wanted to rage, as much as I wanted to tear apart the world they'd built behind my back, I couldn't lose control. Not here. Not now. If I exploded, it wouldn't just hurt Camila or that man. It would hurt my girls. And I refused to let this mess touch them any more than it already had. I stood and walked to the kitchen. My hands shook as I poured a glass of water. The cold glass against my palm steadied me. I needed to think. I needed to figure out my next move. But before that, I needed proof. Proof of everything. I pulled my phone out again and scrolled through the photos I'd taken. They were undeniable. No one could explain this away. Not Camila, not her lover, not anyone. With a shaky exhale, I saved the images to a hidden folder and sent them to my personal email. Insurance. Then, I took one last look at the stairs. The faint light still glowed from our bedroom, and I could hear faint murmurs of movement. They were still asleep. Not for long, that I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, the photos glaring back at me like a wound that wouldn't close. I thought about leaving, grabbing my keys, driving away, and never looking back. But this was my home. I paid for it. I built this life. Why should I be the one to leave? The first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, and I heard footsteps upstairs. My heart raced. They were awake. I stayed rooted in my seat, every nerve in my body screaming to prepare for what was coming. The soft hum of voices grew louder, followed by hurried steps on the stairs. The door to the bedroom opened, and I saw him first. A tall, well-dressed man in his late 30s, still adjusting his shirt as he came down the stairs. He froze when he saw me sitting there, his hand halfway to his tie. His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Morning," I said, my voice low and sharp. I didn't stand, didn't move. Just sat there, letting the weight of my presence settle into the room. He looked like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Instead, he grabbed his jacket off the banister and bolted for the door, fumbling with the handle in his haste. The sound of his footsteps fading down the driveway was oddly satisfying. I took a sip of the cold coffee in front of me, steeling myself for what was next. Camila appeared a moment later, wrapped in the same silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me, her face a mix of surprise and something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "You're home early," she said, forcing a smile. Her voice wavered, the confidence she usually carried faltering. I said nothing, just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. She shifted under my gaze, clutching the robe tighter around herself. "Max," she tried again, her tone softer now. "I didn't expect you back last night. You should have called." Called. My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I set the mug down carefully, the sound of ceramic on wood louder than it should have been. "Who is he?" Her face paled, her composure cracking. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I snapped, the words slicing through the room like a blade. I stood, towering over her, the chair scraping against the floor. "Don't insult me by lying, Camila. Not after what I saw." She took a step back, her mouth opening to respond, but no words coming out. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and held it up to her. The screen displayed one of the photos, her and the man, tangled in our bed. Her hand flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips. "Max, Save it." I cut her off, my voice cold and steady. "I want the truth, Camila. Every single detail. And don't you dare lie to me, because I already know more than you think." For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes darting toward the front door like she was thinking of running. But she didn't. Slowly, she lowered her hand and met my gaze, tears forming in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's complicated. Complicated." I repeated, my laugh bitter and humorless. "You cheated on me in our bed, Camila. What part of that is complicated?" Her tears spilled over, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, holding up a hand to stop her. "You don't get to cry," I said, my voice breaking. "You don't get to act like the victim here. You did this. Now explain yourself." And just like that, the facade crumbled. The tears turned to anger, her hands clenching at her sides. "Fine, Max. You want the truth. You've been so caught up in your work, in your deals, in everything but me. I've felt invisible for years. He made me feel seen. My voice rose, my anger boiling over. "So your solution was to bring him here, to our home, to the bed where I've held you, trusted you, built a life with you. I didn't mean for it to happen." She snapped back, her voice rising to match mine. It happened, okay?" "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice low and furious. "Things like that don't just happen. You chose this. You chose him. And now, you're going to live with the consequences." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I'd heard enough. Without another word, I turned and walked past her, out the front door, slamming it behind me. I needed air, space, anything to stop myself from losing what little control I had left. The cool morning air hit me like a slap to the face. I stood on the porch, gripping the railing so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My body trembled, not just from anger, but from the sheer force of holding myself together. A storm of emotions churned inside me, each one fighting for control. I took a deep breath, then another. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. A few joggers passed by on the sidewalk, giving polite nods as if nothing in my world had just shattered. The gold Mercedes was still in the driveway, its polished surface glinting mockingly in the sunlight. He'd left it behind, probably too rattled to come back for it. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. My hand hovered over the name of my lawyer, a no-nonsense man I hadn't needed to call in years. A divorce felt inevitable, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to think this through, plan my next move. Camila wouldn't get away with this, not without consequences. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and paced the porch. My mind raced. Was this a one-time thing, or had it been going on for months, years? Had she been lying to me every time she kissed me goodbye or told me she loved me? The questions were endless, each one cutting deeper than the last. The front door opened behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I saw her face again, I wasn't sure I'd be able to control myself. "Max," she called out softly, her voice trembling. "Please, we need to talk." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Talk? Now you want to talk? What could you possibly say to make this better?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I messed up." You didn't mess up, Camila," I interrupted, finally turning to face her. The anger I'd been holding back surged to the surface. "You destroyed us. You didn't just trip and fall into bed with some random guy. You made a choice." Over and over again. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. She was good at this, turning on the waterworks whenever things didn't go her way. "It wouldn't work this time. You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't like that. It was just, I felt so lonely, Max. You've been so focused on work, and Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me. I've been working my ass off for us, for this family, to give us a better life. And while I was out there closing deals and making sure we were set for the future, you were, what? Screwing some guy in our bed because you were lonely." She flinched at my words, but I pressed on, my voice rising with every syllable. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to walk into that room last night, to see you with him? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we built together. You betrayed our kids." That last part seemed to hit her the hardest. She looked down, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. "I never wanted to hurt them," she whispered. "I swear, Max. Then why did you bring him here?" I demanded. "Why not take your affair somewhere else? A hotel, his place, anywhere but here. What if they'd woken up? What if they'd seen?" Her silence was answer enough. She hadn't thought about that, about the risk, about how her actions could have shattered our children's world. It only made me angrier. "I can't do this right now," I said, stepping past her toward the driveway. "I need space. I need time to figure out what the hell I'm going to do." "Max, wait, please," she begged, reaching for my arm. I pulled away, not trusting myself to stay calm if she touched me. "I'm not staying here today," I said firmly, "but I'll be back tonight. Don't think for a second this is over. We're going to talk, and you're going to tell me everything." Without waiting for her response, I walked to my car, climbed in, and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of her standing on the porch, clutching her robe, her face streaked with tears. It didn't matter. No amount of tears could undo what she'd done. I drove aimlessly for a while, the streets blurring together as I replayed the events of the last 12 hours. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. Not my lawyer, not my friends, not even myself. Finally, I pulled into the parking lot of a nearby park. It was quiet, the kind of place I used to take the girls when they were little. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the empty swings and slides, trying to piece together the shattered remains of my life. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Everything was about to change. I sat in the car at the park, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I glanced at the screen. It was Alex, my oldest friend. He'd probably heard I'd closed the deal and wanted to celebrate. For a second, I thought about ignoring him, but I needed someone to hear me before I broke. I picked up. "Hey, Max. Big man, congrats on the deal." His voice was full of energy, the kind I couldn't match. "How does it feel to finally hit the big leagues?" I swallowed hard, staring at the empty playground. "Alex," I said, my voice cracking. "It's bad. Really bad." The line went silent for a moment. Then softer. "What's going on?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. "Camila. There's someone else." I caught them. In our bed. His sharp intake of breath said it all. "Max, are you serious?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Last night. I don't even know how long it's been going on." "Jesus, man." His tone shifted, steady and direct. "What do you need? Tell me where you are." "I don't know." My voice broke. I just needed to say out loud. I can't go home right now." "You don't have to," he said firmly. "Come over. We'll figure this out. You don't have to go through this alone." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah." As I hung up, a strange mix of relief and dread settled over me. Saying it out loud made it real. There was no going back now. The drive to Alex's place felt like it took hours, though it was barely 15 minutes. My mind spun in circles, replaying everything. Her face when I confronted her, the way she clutched her robe, the stranger bolting out like a thief. My knuckles turned white on the wheel as I gripped it tighter, trying to hold myself together. When I pulled into Alex's driveway, he was already outside, leaning against the porch railing. His expression was grim, his usual easy smile nowhere to be found. He walked up to the car before I even got out, pulling open the door. "Come on, man," he said quietly. I followed him into the house, the weight of the night still pressing down on me. Alex led me to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "Figured you might need this," he said, sliding one across the counter. I took it without a word, staring into the amber liquid like it held some kind of answer. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "you want to talk about it, or should I just keep pouring?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound more of a choke. "She brought him to our house, Alex, while I was out working my ass off for her. For us." Alex's jaw tightened, and he shook his head. "That's low. That's beyond low." I took a long sip of the whiskey, letting it burn as it went down. "She said she felt lonely," I said bitterly. "Like that justifies it. Like I wasn't doing all of this for her, for the kids." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You don't owe her an excuse. This is on her. Don't let her try to flip this around." I nodded, but the guilt still gnawed at me. Could I have done something different? Was I blind how bad things had gotten? "Max," Alex said, his voice firm, cutting through my spiral of thoughts. "You didn't make her cheat. That was her choice. Remember that." I looked at him, his words sinking in slowly. For the first time since last night, I felt a flicker of clarity. He was right. This wasn't on me, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. Alex let me sit in silence for a while, the whiskey untouched in my hand. He wasn't the type to push when he knew someone needed space, but eventually he broke the quiet. "So, what's your plan?" he asked softly. I stared at the glass, the liquid swirling as I tilted it slightly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd confront her, maybe yell, demand answers. But now, I don't even know where to start." Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "Look, you've got options, man, but you need to be smart. Don't let her control the narrative. You said you took photos, right?" I nodded, pulling out my phone and sliding it across the counter to him. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the images. His lips pressed into a thin line, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Unbelievable," he muttered, setting the phone down. "You've got everything you need right here. No one can argue with this." "Yeah," I said bitterly. "Proof of how little I meant to her." "That's not what it proves," Alex said sharply, his voice cutting through my self-pity. "This isn't about you, Max. This is about her. She's the one who did this. She's the one who threw it all away. I looked up at him, his words hitting harder than I wanted to admit. He was right, but it didn't make the weight on my chest any lighter. You need to protect yourself, he continued. And your kids. Have you thought about them in all this? The mention of my daughters sent a fresh wave of anger and pain crashing over me. They're the only reason I didn't lose it last night, I said, my voice tight. I couldn't let them wake up to that. To see their mom like that. Alex nodded slowly. That's good. That's what matters. But you need to think long term. What happens next? Are you staying? Leaving? What about custody? Custody. The word hit like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even let myself think that far ahead. Splitting time with my daughters. Explaining to them why our family was falling apart. It was too much to process all at once. I don't want to leave them, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They need stability, not more chaos. Then you fight for them, Alex said firmly. You get a lawyer, you make your case, and you don't back down. But you've got to play it smart. No rash decisions, no letting your anger get the best of you. Understand? I nodded again, swallowing hard. Alex leaned back, crossing his arms. And Camila, what's she saying about all this? She tried to blame me, I said bitterly. Said she felt lonely, that I wasn't around enough. Like that's some kind of excuse. Bull, Alex said, shaking his head. She made a choice. Max, don't let her twist this into being your fault. I know, I said quietly, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. We sat in silence again, the weight of the situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Finally, Alex broke the quiet. Look, man, he said, his voice softer now. You've been blindsided, but you're stronger than this. You've got people who care about you. You don't have to figure it all out today. Just take it one step at a time. I nodded, grateful for his steady presence. Thanks, Alex, I said. I don't know what I'd do without you. He smirked, the faintest glimmer of his usual humor breaking through. Well, let's not make a habit of this, okay? I prefer celebrating your victories, not cleaning up messes like this. A small, tired smile tugged at my lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. After a while, I left Alex's place and drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head. I ended up at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I slid into a booth and ordered coffee, staring out the window as the waitress poured it. The smell of fresh coffee should have been comforting, but all I could think about was the conversation waiting for me back at home. Camila's excuses, her justifications, the lies she'd tell to paint herself as the victim. I couldn't go back without a plan. Alex was right. I had to be smart. I pulled out my phone and opened my email, forwarding the photos to my lawyer with a short, curt message. We need to talk. Call me first thing tomorrow. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The coffee grew cold in front of me as I stared out the window, the sun sinking lower on the horizon. The house, the life I'd built, felt farther away than ever. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this break me. Not for her, not for him, and definitely not for the gold Mercedes still sitting in my driveway. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the yard. The gold Mercedes was gone. Of course, it was. No doubt he'd come back for it while I was at Alex's. The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it aside. The house felt like enemy territory now. Every step toward the front door was heavier than the last. When I opened it, the smell of dinner hit me, something with garlic and herbs. She was cooking, like nothing had happened. I found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and puffy, but there was something else in them, defiance maybe, or desperation. You came back, she said softly, like she wasn't sure if I would. For now, I replied, my voice cold. I stayed by the doorway, arms crossed. She set the spoon down and turned to face me fully. We need to talk, Max. I know Stop, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to lead this conversation. Not after what you've done. Her lips trembled, but she didn't respond. I'll listen, I continued, my tone icy. But not tonight. Tonight, I need you to stay out of my way. Tomorrow, we talk. And I mean everything, Camila. No lies. No excuses. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded. Okay. I turned and left the room, heading upstairs without another word. When I reached the bedroom, I stopped. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. That bed wasn't mine anymore. Instead, I grabbed a blanket from the hall closet and made my way to the couch. The weight of the day pressed down on me as I sank into it, staring at the dark ceiling. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight, I let the silence swallow me whole. The sound of birds outside the window stirred me awake. I'd barely slept, the weight of the night before pressing down as soon as I opened my eyes. My back ached from the couch, but I didn't care. The bedroom upstairs was off limits, at least for me. The smell of coffee wafted from the kitchen. She was up. My jaw tightened as I sat up and rubbed my face, trying to summon the energy for what was coming. Camila was sitting at the table when I walked in, 2 mugs of coffee in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her hair was tied back messily, her face pale. She gestured toward the chair across from her. Sit. I stayed standing for a moment, staring at her. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave again, but I couldn't. I had to know. I lowered myself into the chair, the scrape of it against the floor loud in the silence. She reached for her mug, but her hands were shaking so much she barely lifted it. I don't know where to start, she said quietly. Start with him, I said, my voice flat. Who is he? Her lips trembled, and she set the mug down, wrapping her arms around herself like it would shield her. His name is Marcus. He's a client. We've been seeing each other for a few months. The words felt like a knife to the gut, even though I'd expected them. My hands curled into fists under the table. A few months. I repeated, my voice dangerously low. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen, Max. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You didn't mean for it to go this far? Camila, you brought him into our home, into our bed. How do you explain that? She flinched, her tears spilling over. I was lonely, she whispered. You were always working, always away. Annie, he made me feel seen, like I mattered. The room fell silent. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the mess she was feeding me. She wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just sorry she'd been caught. So that's it? I asked, my voice tight. You felt neglected. So you decided to blow up our life. Our kids' lives. I didn't think it would. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. No, you didn't think at all, I snapped. And now I have to clean up the mess you made. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. My sympathy for her had been burned away the second I saw her with him. Does he know about our kids? I asked, my voice sharp. She looked up at me, horrified. Of course not. Max, I swear, I kept him away from them. I never wanted them to be a part of this. Too late for that, I said bitterly. Because now I have to figure out how to tell them why their family is falling apart. Camila broke down completely, burying her face in her hands. But I felt nothing. No pity, no guilt, no love. Just emptiness. I stood, pushing the chair back. We're done for now. I need time to think. And if you're smart, you'll stay out of my way until I've figured out what comes next. Without waiting for a response, I left the room. The sound of her crying followed me as I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The end of our marriage had begun, and there was no turning back that I closed the door to my office and sank into the chair, staring blankly at the walls. The room was a small sanctuary, cluttered with files and knickknacks that Camila had always said ruined the decor. It was the one space in the house that still felt like mine. The silence was deafening. I picked up a photo from my desk, one of all 4 of us at the beach last summer. Camila's smile seemed so real back then, her arms wrapped around our daughters as if nothing in the world could touch us. It felt like a lie now, one I hadn't realized I'd been living. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Alex. Hey, I answered, my voice hoarse. How'd it go? he asked, skipping any pleasantries. She admitted it, I said simply. His name's Marcus. A client of hers. It's been going on for months. There was a long pause before Alex spoke again. I'm sorry, man. It's a lot to take in. Yeah, I muttered, rubbing my temples. And now I have to figure out how to tell the girls. How do you even explain something like this? You don't, Alex said firmly. Not yet. They're too young to understand. You focus on them. Max, keep things as normal as you can until you're ready to make a move. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. You're right. I don't know what that move is yet. You'll figure out, he said confidently. Take your time. And if you need anything, you know where to find me. Thanks, I said quietly before hanging up. I set the phone down and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a tangle of questions and doubts. How much more hadn't she told me? How many other lies were waiting to surface? A knock at the door startled me. Camila stood in the doorway, her face pale and blotchy. What do you want? I asked, my tone sharp. She hesitated, wringing her hands. The girls will be up soon. I thought we should talk about what to tell them. I let out a bitter laugh. Now you want to think about them. Where was this concern last night when you were with him? Her eyes filled with tears again, but I wasn't moved. Don't worry, I said coldly. I'll handle it. I'll make sure they don't hate their mother, even if you've given them every reason to. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. I turned back to my desk, dismissing her without another word. After a long moment, she left, closing the door softly behind her. I stared at the beach photo again, the happy faces staring back at me like ghosts of a life I'd lost. Whatever came next, it wouldn't look anything like this. The sound of laughter drifted from the hallway as my daughters, Emily and Grace, woke up. Their giggles were the first real noise in the house that morning, and it hit me like a punch in the chest. For a moment, I considered staying locked in the office, avoiding them altogether. But that wasn't an option. I got up, forced myself to breathe, and headed to the kitchen. Camila was already there, pouring cereal into bowls like it was any other morning. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes heavy with unspoken words, but I ignored her. Dad. Emily, the oldest, ran into the room and threw her arms around me. Grace followed, tugging at my shirt for her turn. Hey girls, I said, mustering the best smile I could. I ruffled Grace's hair and kissed the top of Emily's head. How'd you sleep? Good. Emily said brightly. Mom said we might go to the park today. I glanced at Camila, my stomach tightening. She was trying to keep up appearances, like last night hadn't happened. We'll see, I said carefully. Depends on how the day goes. Grace tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, are you okay? You look tired. I knelt to her level and smiled softly. I'm fine, sweetie. Just stayed up late working. Nothing to worry about. She studied me with a look that reminded me too much of her mother, those big, questioning eyes. For a moment, I thought she might press further, but then she just nodded and went to the table. Camila sat with them, making small talk as they ate. Her voice was light, but I could hear the strain behind it. Every interaction felt like a performance, a desperate attempt to cling to normalcy. I busied myself at the counter, pouring coffee and pretending to check emails on my phone. I couldn't sit at the table with them. Not yet. When breakfast was over, Emily asked, "Can we watch cartoons, Dad?" Sure, I said, grateful for the distraction. Go ahead. I'll be in soon. The girls raced to the living room, their laughter echoing down the hallway. The sound was a temporary bomb, but it didn't last. Camila started clearing the dishes, her movements deliberate and tense. They don't know, she said softly, her back to me. No thanks to you, I said coldly, keeping my voice low to avoid them overhearing. She turned, her eyes filled with tears again. I'm trying, Max. I really am. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. You don't get points for effort, Camila. Not after what you've done. Her shoulders sagged, and for once, she didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to the dishes. I took my coffee and walked to the living room, sitting on the couch as the girls laughed at their favorite show. For a few minutes, I let myself sink into their world, pretending everything was fine. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, a weight I couldn't ignore. This was only the beginning. Sitting on the couch with Emily and Grace, I forced a smile every time they turned to me, their little faces lit up by the glow of the TV. The sound of cartoons filled the room, but I barely registered it. My focus kept drifting back to the kitchen, where Camila moved around quietly, rinsing dishes and putting them away. It felt like watching a stranger in my house, someone pretending to be a part of my life. Her movements were automatic, too deliberate, as if staying busy might erase the truth. But it wouldn't. Nothing could. "Dad," Emily said, snapping me back. She was standing in front of me now, holding her favorite book. "Can we read this later? You promised last week." "Of course," I said, ruffling her hair. "Later tonight, okay." She nodded happily and bounced back to Grace, who was busy flipping through her coloring book. Their simple joy, their innocence. It was like a knife to the gut. They had no idea the foundation of their family was cracking beneath them. After a while, I stood and stretched. "I'll be in my office for a bit," I told them. "Call me if you need anything." Camila had just finished wiping the counters when I passed the kitchen. She looked up, as if she wanted to say something, but I didn't stop. I went straight to the office and closed the door, locking it this time. Inside, I sat heavily at the desk, staring at the emails piling up on my laptop. None of them mattered right now. My focus shifted to the phone in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts, pausing on the name of my lawyer, Michael. I hadn't called him yet, hadn't made any official moves. I wanted to be sure of my next steps before dragging anyone else into this. Taking a deep breath, I dialed. "Michael Carter," his familiar voice answered after a few rings. "It's Max," I said, my voice low. "We need to meet. It's urgent." "Everything okay?" he asked, concern edging his tone. "No," I said bluntly. "It's not. Camila's been having an affair, and I need to know my options. Custody, the house, everything." There was a brief pause. "I'm sorry to hear that, Max. When do you want to come in?" "Tomorrow," I said. "First thing." "I'll make time for you," Michael said firmly. "Just bring everything you can, documents, texts, photos, anything that might help." "I've got proof," I said, the bitterness creeping back into my voice. "Plenty of it." "Good. We'll start from there." After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair, exhaling shakily. This was real now. No more pretending things might go back to normal. Later that afternoon, I found Camila sitting at the dining table, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and tired. "Are we going to talk now?" she asked hesitantly. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "About what? How you destroyed our family. Or how you're planning to spin this to make yourself look better." She flinched, her lips pressing together. "Max, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've hurt you. But I want to fix this. For us. For the girls." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Fix this? You can't fix this, Camila. You think I'm just going to forget what you've done? Pretend it didn't happen?" Her voice trembled. "I never stopped loving you, Max. I know I made a mistake, but—" "Mistake?" I snapped, stepping closer. "A mistake is spilling coffee or missing an appointment. Well, you did. That was a choice." Over and over again, tears filled her eyes, and she stood, reaching out toward me. "Please, Max. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." I stepped back, her touch like a slap. "You already lost me, Camila. You lost me the second you let him into our bed." Her sobs filled the room as she sank back into the chair, her head in her hands. But I couldn't let myself care. "Not anymore. What happens next isn't up to you," I said coldly. "You don't get to decide what's best for me, or for the girls. You gave up that right." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "What are you going to do?" I stared at her, the weight of her question pressing down like a boulder. "I'm going to do what you should have done," I said finally. "I'm going to protect our kids. From this. From you." Her sobs grew louder as I turned and walked away, the sound following me up the stairs like a ghost. I closed the door to the guest room, leaning against it, as the tears I'd been holding back finally came. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let them fall, quiet, bitter, and heavy with everything I'd lost. This was the beginning of the end, and I wasn't sure I'd survive it. But one thing was clear. I had to fight. Not for her. Not for us. For my daughters. For what was left of my family. The next morning, the house was still, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. Camila hadn't come out of the bedroom, and I hadn't gone in to check on her. The girls were eating breakfast in the kitchen, their chatter light and innocent, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. I grabbed my jacket and keys, ready to head to my meeting with Michael. Camila appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing the same robe from the night before, her face pale and drawn. "Where are you going?" she asked quietly, her voice shaky. "To figure out what happens next," I said without looking at her. She hesitated, her hand gripping the railing. "Max, please, don't do anything rash. We can fix this." I turned to face her, the cold distance in my voice unmistakable. "You can't fix what's broken, Camila. Not this time." Her lips trembled, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, watching as I walked out the door. Michael's office was quiet, the ticking of the clock on the wall the only sound as I laid out the photos, emails, and everything else I'd brought. Michael flipped through them, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is more than enough," he said finally, setting the papers down. "Custody won't be a problem. The judge will see this for what it is, infidelity, negligence, and a complete disregard for the kids' well-being." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And the house?" "Likely yours, especially since you've been the primary provider," he said. "But we'll fight for everything. You've got a solid case, Max." Hearing it laid out so clearly should have been comforting, but it wasn't. This wasn't the life I'd planned. Winning the house and custody didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. When I got home, Camila was sitting in the living room, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. The girls were in their rooms, playing quietly. She stood when I walked in, her hands clasped in front of her. "Max," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I met with a lawyer," I said flatly. Her breath hitched, and she took a step back. "You're filing?" "Yes," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'll be fighting for custody of the girls. You can stay here for now, but this is temporary. I want you out by the end of the month." Her legs buckled, and she sank onto the couch, shaking her head. "Please, Max, don't do this. I'll change. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't take the girls from me. They deserve better," I said firmly. "They deserve a parent they can trust. And that's not you." Her sobs filled the room, but I turned away, heading to the stairs. I couldn't watch her crumble anymore. I had my daughters to think about, my own sanity to protect. That night, I tucked Emily and Grace into bed like I always did, reading them a chapter from Emily's favorite book. As I kissed them goodnight, Grace looked up at me, her little brow furrowed. "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other?" she asked softly. I froze for a moment, my heart breaking all over again. "A little," I admitted. "But it's not your fault, sweetheart. I promise." She nodded, her eyes wide and trusting. "Okay. I love you, Daddy." "I love you too," I said, my voice thick with emotion. As I closed their door, I felt the weight of the day pressing down again. This was just the beginning of a long road, but at least I knew my priorities. Camila's betrayal had shattered our family, but I wouldn't let it destroy my daughters. They were my anchor now, the reason to keep going. I headed to the guest room and closed the door behind me, locking it like I was shutting out the past. This was the end of us, but maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of something better.